Welcome everyone to the latest I4CP Next Practices weekly call series. Thank you for already introducing yourselves over in the chat. Please keep the chat open. We'll be using that to take questions and comments from everyone today. Again, this is the weekly Next Practices series from I4CP. If you're not familiar with I4CP, we are the Institute for Corporate Productivity. We're a human capital research firm. We discover the people practices that truly drive high performance in all sorts of organizations, public, private, government, NGOs, and more. We define high performance by 4 criteria: revenue growth, market share, profitability, and customer satisfaction. And we do this when we do our quantitative surveys, which we have several in the field each quarter. So always keep an eye out for those. I'll be mentioning one of them that's open right now in just a moment. And what we do with our surveys is we look at practices in human capital, human research areas, all sorts of different topic areas, and try and tease out what the high-performing companies are doing different than their low-performing counterparts. We sort of look at the top quartile, compare that with roughly the lower quartile, and see what we can tease out from that data. We are a member-based organization. You see here some of the I4CP member groups. Some are very large organizations like Amazon and Nike and Microsoft, Ford, Accenture, and others. You see some that are much smaller, maybe not household names, maybe new to you. We've got a growing cohort of unicorn organizations, those fast growth organizations. We also have members from across all different market verticals, from healthcare to tech to finance, manufacturing, you name it. If you're with an I4CP member organization, special welcome to you. Glad you could join us today. If you're not with an I4CP member org, but think that your organization could benefit from full access to all of our research tools, the member community, and everything else that we provide, just visit us at i4cp.com and fill out the form. Reach out to any I4CP employee. We'll be happy to connect you with the right person to learn more. My name is Tom Stone. I'm a senior research analyst here at I4CP. Today, I'm going to be joined in just a moment by a special guest, another senior research analyst here at I4CP, Katheryn Brekken. So good morning to you, Katheryn.
Hi, everyone.
Good morning. So we'll hear from Katheryn in just a moment on both culture fitness, which is something we've talked about on some previous sessions here at Next Practices Weekly, but she's going to infuse some of our latest study data from AI as well. But I do want to note a few other quick announcements before we get to that topic. As I said, this is a weekly call series. For those of you that are new to it, you see some of the guests that we'll have coming up: Mike Eby from Delaware North, Rocky Rockingham, love that name, from GE Appliances, coming up on September 7th. And then we have started expanding globally far more than we have in the past. We've always had our research have a global reach, but now in terms of community and these kind of calls, we're doing some that are at time zone times that are more appropriate for both EMEA and APAC. So we'll have one of those coming up on the 13th for our friends in Europe, Middle East, and Africa. A couple of other quick announcements. As I mentioned, we have surveys in the field regularly. The one that's open right now is near and dear to my heart. I am the leading researcher on this one, our Learning and Development Technology Survey, L&D Tech. So if you think you or someone in your organization would be the right person to do this survey, it only takes about 15 minutes. We've already gotten hundreds of responses from all sorts of different great organizations. Would love to include everyone's organization that's on the call today. Zeta has put the link to that survey in the chat. Click that, have it open, return to it later, or please pass it on to someone who's in L&D or who heads up HR tech at your organization. Would love to have you represented. Speaking of HR tech, also want to note, we're going to have a pretty solid presence this year at the HR Tech Conference that's put on by Human Resource Executive Magazine. That'll be in October. It's an in-person conference, October 10th through the 13th in Las Vegas. This is the largest and most important conference that specializes in HR technology every year, at least in North America. I would say probably globally. Very large conference, massive, massive expo hall, lots of vendors represented. You see here, with using the code I4CP, you can get $300 off of an all-access conference pass. In terms of our representation, I know, Katheryn, you're going to be there along with our CEO, Kevin Oakes. You all are doing both a pre-conference workshop, as you see here, and a mega session as well. All right, so with that, I'm going to turn things over to none other than Katheryn Brekken, Senior Research Analyst and PhD here at I4CP. And we're going to start things off with a poll, and then Katheryn is going to run with it with a discussion of both culture, fitness, and AI.
Yes. Thank you, Tom. Zeta, could you help us get that poll up? Thank you. This was a question we posed quite a bit in 2022 to organizations, and led to the culture. It was part of the culture fitness report that came out and that we talked about this spring on this show, as well as at our conference and other places. So if we could just take a minute, and we're kind of going to just level set, find out where everybody's at. Tell us how your culture has changed over the past year. Tom, do you have any bets? No?
I was on mute there for just a moment. No worries. I think what we've heard previously is that a lot of cultures maybe had some bumpy patches over the past 3 years, but that overall many did get healthier. So I would say if there's a lean, it's probably going to lean towards the healthy side, but a good number, probably neutral or maybe slightly more toxic.
Yes, I'm going to go with more toxic. Oh, darn, I was very wrong. I was only thinking because of all the headlines about returning to office, economic uncertainty, had layoffs that that might have had, might have changed the trend in culture health that we've been seeing. But yeah, it looks like 44%, the majority of you, your culture has become slightly healthier over the past year, which is wonderful. Can you define healthy? I am afraid I missed the earlier calls. That's a great question, Audie. It's one of those that we kind of leave up to you as subjective, but it's one in which there is trust, and people feel free to speak up. It's places where you want your employees feel compelled to do their best work. Employee engagement is high. We do have a formal definition in the study, but that I think kind of covers the gist of it. However, it is a subjective term, and we often, we defer to you too in your organization. Let's see. All right, let's share and dig into the presentation. Okay, I'm not seeing share. Hold on one second. There we go. Okay. So for those of you who did miss the earlier calls and don't remember, that's okay. I4CP conducted an online survey. We had about 960 respondents in the fall of 2022. It was a global survey panel comprised of participants from 53 different countries, and approximately half of the organizations represented are what we call large, which we define by employing 1,000 or more employees. So much of the data in this report refers to those 449 large employers in the study, in addition to the many qualitative interviews that we did to better understand what organizations were doing to improve their culture, what worked, what didn't. And we'll talk about some of those practices today. Just a quick reminder here about why we care about culture. This is what I like to say is the business case, why culture matters. So we asked participants how various workforce outcomes like employee productivity, engagement, retention, et cetera, changed over the past 2 years. And our regression analysis of the data then found the health of the culture plays a significant, important role in predicting employee productivity or improvements in employee productivity. So there's not just a significant correlation between the two. Our data found that culture directly impacted perceived changes to employee productivity, which in turn then has a large impact on market performance. This is equally important because measuring employee productivity is a conundrum for many organizations these days. Just like organizational culture can be a little bit nebulous to pin down, productivity is even worse. So when we think about how do we measure, talk about productivity, culture can be sort of the canary in the coal mine, and helping you understand what's going on with your productivity. So there are a variety of metrics that we discuss in the report that talk about how to measure culture and the most effective ways. Just to summarize, many and frequently is the gist of that. But your culture health then can sort of be a guide or a rule of thumb on what's going on likely with your productivity. All right. So more of why culture matters. These are what I like to call the symptoms of fit cultures. All good things. Organizations found to have the fittest cultures in our study report significantly higher employee net promoter scores than those with unfit cultures over the past 2 years. Companies with healthy cultures reported excellent eNPS scores 9 times more often than their unfit counterparts. They were also 4.5 times more likely to report an increase in employee engagement scores since the onset of the pandemic. Very fit cultures are 4 times more likely to have experienced improved retention, and are 3 times more likely to have reported their ability to attract top talent since 2020 improved as well. Unsurprisingly, this has resulted in improved productivity. Organizations that have fit cultures are 2 times more likely to report increased employee productivity during the same period. And much of this stems from the overall well-being of the workforce. Survey respondents representing organizations with fit cultures were 3 times more likely to indicate well-being improved in comparison to their counterparts. And finally, they were 1.5 times more likely to report improved diversity or representation over that period of time. And so these are the 7 habits of very healthy cultures. These habits involve flexibility, learning mindsets, and leaders. And I want to take these and give these culture fitness, 7 healthy habits, a little bit of a twist. I want to talk not just about healthy cultures, but I want to talk about how to create change-ready cultures today. You just got a surprise of where I'm going next. Basically, you can't read a business case study these days without realizing how much success depends on culture. The unwritten rules of organizational behavior can make the difference between success and failure. You can't have innovation without the right culture. You can't have high market performance without the right culture. You can't thrive over the long time without culture. And so if you want to bring your organization into this dynamic 21st century that continues to surprise in terms of external events, I said surprise, not delight, you need to build the right culture. And so we thought today, let's talk about how leaders can strategically use their culture to adapt and thrive through change.
Hey, Katheryn, one thing I just like to note for those on the call, I know many organizations are sort of looking at their organization's culture. Often that question of how do you define a healthy culture or a toxic culture comes up, as it did in the chat already today. One of the things that we like to do with our studies when we ask that sort of broad question up front, as we did both in the poll today and in the study itself, is we don't want to presuppose the characteristics or the behaviors or the practices that would define something vague like culture. And so we asked that initial question, and then through the survey and through the analysis, we determine, as you just showed, 7 habits of a healthy culture. One of our previous sessions honed in on the characteristics of a toxic culture. And so that's sort of what we get at the end of the analysis, at the end of the study. But for those of you that are on the call that are maybe needing to go to your C-suite or others in your organization, maybe you're looking at transforming or renovating your organization's culture, and you need to start with some sort of definition. That's where these traits, characteristics, habits, if you will, the practices that we share in our research can really help you to define, well, what exactly do we mean by healthy culture? What exactly do we mean by toxic culture? That's where you can build your own definition from those lists.
True. And I also failed to say that. So we asked for that sort of self-assessment, right, of your culture. And then we also gave survey participants 26 culture traits from which to choose to select is what are the top, I think we said 5 that best describe your culture. We also did culture types. And from that, we triangulated through statistical analysis, I think a pretty good definition of what we're calling the 6 culture traits of healthy cultures. And we'll get to those. If you stick with me through the hour, you'll get that reward. You'll get to see that list. But we also have 9 toxic traits that were significantly correlated and help explain how people self-assess their culture and tended to be, in the more toxic range. So that's how we've kind of come to defining in this data who are the healthy ones, who are the toxic ones. It was based on several measures, and we didn't just rely on self-assessment. We also asked for a lot more involved in that. So stick with me, we'll get there, I promise. Yeah. But a lot of this is also going to be in the brief that I know Zeta has probably posted already for the culture fitness study. So, take a look at that too at the end of the call. I think that'll also answer a lot of the background questions. one of the key reasons I'm still framing why we're talking about change and culture today, but one of the key reasons we're talking about it is because organizations' priorities have done so dramatically in the past 8 months. This slide from our productivity predicament study is really telling. We saw empathy drop from the most important priority leaders were supposed to focus on in conversations with their teams to the bottom of the list. And you can see organizational goal achievement is now the top priority that leaders are supposed to be focusing on. This whiplash can slow productivity as well. Employees are confused, leaders are so focused on one type of relationship with you at one point, and then suddenly they're being told that it's gone to the bottom of the list. It's exhausting, and it begs the question, why should I pay attention to what my leaders are saying now when it could change in a minute? And if Zeta hasn't done so already, I know she's going to post the link to the publicly available executive brief for this study as well.
Oh, wait, hold on.
All right. Another change du jour is generative AI. We have a study that's coming out September 21st that examines how generative AI is affecting HR. And we also have some publicly available resources from our AI toolkit that recently came out that we'll post here. Today, we're going to talk about and tie these two themes together, culture change, focusing on how organizational cultures can adapt to rapidly changing technological landscape. But I think you could really kind of put that to any of the external events in addition to technology, such as economic upsets and how they affect and how the organization needs to be ready to adapt and be agile. So before we get into this endeavor, I always like to keep in mind that this is from our original culture fitness study. Only 15% of culture change efforts are viewed as a success. So we're going to talk about these techniques and these ideas today. We're going to do some brainstorming, but remember that this is a challenge for most organizations, and it's hard to get right. So with that in mind, let's do another level set. Knowing how hard change can be, let's identify how is change generally viewed in your organization? How would you best describe that? You have a couple options here, and I'll allow you to sort of read through those.
While everyone's voting, and thank you for reading through the responses there. This is something we've asked about several times over the years, dating back to our agility study from 2017. And it's always interesting to see from year to year. I guess we haven't asked it every year, but we've probably asked it in 3 or 4 different studies.
Yeah, I'm interested to see what organizations will say. Just coming out of the generative AI study that we concluded at the end of July, organizations are really slow to adapt to that technology, even though it's imploded. It had over 100 million users within the first 2 months of ChatGPT 3.5. So, okay, as wearing us down, there's been too much for too long, 50%. That is interesting, and I am not surprised.
And I would say that's a bit stronger than we've seen in some of our studies. Usually we have a little bit more of an even spread across all of these.
You're right. That's a good point, Tom. Not a good sign. I'm happy to see, though, at the top of the hour, we saw that more cultures are getting at least slightly healthier.
Yes,
during this time
that
period,
was positive.
But change is dragging us down. I get it. All right. Well, thank you for doing that. So it makes this slide, I think, a little bit more interesting to comprehend when you think about what the benchmarks of this particular audience here. This is from our culture fitness study, and the blue bars represent the high performance organizations and the gray bars mark the low performance organizations. And as Tom mentioned at the top of the hour, I4CP loves to look at its data through the lens of market performance. And so we look at organizations, revenue growth, market share, profitability, customer satisfaction, those 4 items over a 5-year period, and we create an index that allows us to compare and contrast practices of those in the top quartile, our high performance organizations, with those in the low quartile. As you can see, and I'm happy to say, I guess the high performance organizations were far more likely to view change as normal, expected, manageable, or even, you can see here in the middle, as part of our business model to be the disruptor. They're more than twice as likely, almost 3 times as likely to view change as part of the business model and to be a disruptor. And when you compare that to who had healthy cultures and who had toxic cultures, so healthier cultures were statistically more likely to say change is viewed as normal, expected, and manageable. They were also statistically more likely to say it's viewed as part of the business model to be the disruptor. Toxic cultures were far more likely to say they view change as wearing us down. There's been too much for too long. As a threat, it destabilizes what we do. As overwhelming and beyond our ability to manage. And so, very similar to what you see the differentials between market performance, you're seeing with those with healthy cultures and those with toxic cultures. There's a strong connection to being able to roll with change and having a healthy culture. And really, it is the culture that makes, the practices and the behaviors that allow change to roll, So that's where we're going to dig in today. We're going to talk about new habits to build a change-ready culture. And what's so great about a change-ready culture? They're 3 times more likely to have high market performance. They are more likely to have higher retention, engagement, productivity, well-being, and better culture health. They are more likely to have higher levels of innovation, and they are more likely to embrace generative AI. This is from our study that I mentioned that's coming out in September. Is HR ready, or is HR already behind in the AI revolution? And we are going to be doing a workshop on this, a pre-HR Tech workshop on that Monday before the HR Tech conference. And then we are also going to, I say we, Kevin Oakes, our CEO, and I are also going to do a session Thursday as well at the conference on the findings from this study and the recommendations on how HR is incorporating generative AI and how it's changing HR. But we asked participants about their senior leadership's position on employees using generative AI at work. And there were several categories to choose from. The first you see up here is fully embrace. These are leaders who want to see how generative AI impacts the organization. Thoughtful. These are leaders who are experimenting with generative AI, encouraging its use, but have put parameters on the usage. And cautious. Those are organizations where leaders are largely in a wait and see mode. They're interested, they're paying attention, but they want to see what others are doing first. 21% of organizations have left it a mystery to employees, meaning they haven't staked out a claim. They haven't announced a position, and employees don't necessarily know whether they can use it or not. And interestingly, we are finding out more and more cases where employees within the organization are using generative AI without the organization's approval or knowledge. And so, the underlying part of that is, are they engaging in risky behaviors, and are they putting intellectual property and sensitive data at risk? But that's from the study. So 4% of organizations have completely forbidden. And then there were 6% of participants who literally just didn't know what their organization's position on generative AI usage was. And so what's interesting about this is 42% are exploring what generative AI can do, and 52%, the majority of organizations, are not. So we know, that most of the organizations aren't doing anything about generative AI yet, right? But it's a major external impactor of organizations and work processes and all of the things. And so we talked about the 7 healthy habits of our culture fitness survey and the interviews that we surfaced. What we see here are 9 specific strategies that we talk about in culture fitness among those 7 healthy habits. But I want you to see these because these are the ones we were able to specifically single out, the practices that we were able to specifically single out and examine in regression models to understand, if you take this action, will it significantly impact or influence the health of your culture? What you see here are the percentages are R-squares, and you can read the report for the explanation, but essentially you're looking at, if I set aside the size of the organization and its market performance, how much would this strategy move the needle on the scale of culture fitness at the average organization? And as you can see, leaders' consistent demonstration of organizational values reigns supreme in its ability to move the needle on culture, explaining 43% of how participants rated their culture health when controlling for size and market performance. Training leaders, that second circle you see, training leaders on the desired behaviors and values of the organization is another fruitful strategy. Respondents who report that their companies have very healthy cultures were 4 times more likely to say this training strategy is in place, and it explained 15 to 14% of healthy cultures, depending on what level is focused on. So leaders have a big say when it comes to culture change. And if we want our culture to embrace change, we need to train leaders in the right way to do this. So to frame where we're about to go, I would love to hear from you in the chat. Tell us about a time when a leader's example of an organization's value stood out to you. I would love to hear in the chat. I think this is going to be very inspirational, but also give us all some ideas on ways that we could exhibit our organization's values and inspire those around us within our companies. And so,
Yeah,
Tom,
certainly not all leaders are equally good at modeling and living the organization's values. So look forward to seeing a few responses to that in the chat. Speaking of the chat, just want to remind everyone, you can ask questions there as you have been. We've had a pretty active chat so far today. I'd asked a question when you mentioned earlier, change-ready organizations. That's a phrase that I hadn't heard much, say 5 years ago. We did a study, as I said, on agility, which is obviously related, if not synonymous with being change ready. And so I asked, what terms do you use in your organizations? Do you use the term change ready? Do you use agile? One person said yes, agile. Someone else said resilient, and someone else said adaptive. So we've got a nice little thesaurus going on here in the chat as to how people are describing initiatives that are being focused on whether or not their culture is change ready.
I love that. That's fantastic. And so I'm not seeing any examples here, but maybe people are still typing.
Katheryn,
oh, yes.
This is Cordell. So I'll give you one that's actually kind of the opposite, I think, of what you're looking for. Can you hear me?
Okay. Yeah, I can hear you. Thank you.
Well, just because I think it illustrates the point, the top point you made on the prior slide. And this is from an organization that touts how much it cares about employees. However, in the past year, it experienced a significant slowdown in its business, and it did not announce, but was well known to have eliminated a number of people. And when it's obvious that you're doing that and leaders don't talk about it, it's a perfect example of when they don't, leaders' values are opposite of what they preach, and then how that results in a negative culture.
Absolutely. I think that's a fantastic example. It really, I mean, it takes a long time to establish trust in a culture, and very little time, seconds sometimes, to break it.
Yeah, a good example of a toxic behavior there instead of a healthy one. And we are getting a few responses here. Current CHRO is actively demonstrating inclusion by how she supports the systems and processes, recruiting for open leadership roles. Another response, again, related to respect and inclusion. CEO came to the defense of a frontline manager when an EVP was overusing their powers. Both good examples.
Absolutely. And Tom, what about you? Do you have an example?
Oh, good question. I would, again, go back to the word trust. I certainly feel like some organizations, whether they call out the word trust in their values or not, it's a part of their culture. And I have certainly felt most comfortable working in organizations with high degrees of transparency and trust, which go hand in hand. And when my direct managers or maybe my skip level boss exemplify being as transparent as possible, those have been the best organizations that I've ever worked with, including I4CP as one of those. I'll say one of those two.
And what I know about you, that makes a lot of sense too. And that kind of brings to mind that the values you see your leaders demonstrating are going to be different from the values that your coworkers may see too, because depending on your own values and how you anchor that, certain things are going to stand out and others are not. I love Jim Ranton's example. An employee got drunk on the job and the CEO approved retaining the employee as long as they sought treatment and signed a retention agreement. I think that's a fantastic example. Mine would be, I was new on the job and I had a long late night meeting with a bunch of the leadership, and we were fine tuning a document that I had opened from an email and never saved. And right after that meeting, I slammed my computer down and went to have dinner with my family. And I returned to the document the next morning, and it was gone. My computer had rebooted overnight. And having to own up to that silly, stupid mistake to my new boss and then to the CEO was terrifying. And but what my boss did was he was about to go on vacation the next day. He cleared time on his schedule and recreated the document with me. And then when I sent the new document to the leadership, and I fessed up completely to what I'd done and the mistakes and how I was never, this is my process and how I'll make sure it doesn't happen again. The CEO also reiterated, this happens. And I'm glad we were able to recreate it. And that was a psychological safety, but really also demonstrated, I think, the values in the organization that leadership wants to aspire to. And it's really just like one of those powerful moments that'll stand out in a career. So
getting some
love
other
to
good
highlight
examples.
those.
Thanks everyone for chiming in. These are great. Since you shared that personal one, I'll share just really quickly. I had a manager in my first ever corporate job, so maybe 20 years ago, and she made it very clear that me as an employee was more important than, say, some of the tech or equipment we had, because in my third week on the job, I ran over my laptop with my car. Yeah, and I was in my 20s, very young, super worried, not knowing, the value of an employee necessarily over equipment, but they made it very clear they weren't going to fire me over that.
I love it. See, these things matter, and they actually kind of remembering them or even voicing them sort of makes me super happy. It's like maybe the best part of my day. Thanks, guys. All right. Well, with that in mind, this is what our data found. These are ways to encourage leaders to walk the walk, which it sounds so simple and so easy to do, but our research showed the majority of organizations didn't have leaders that were doing this to a high extent. So since the strongest impact on culture health our data identified was the extent to which leaders consistently demonstrate organizational values, we dug deeper into these actions that can influence whether this happens at an organization. Some, like training, were significant, but the two that really stood out to us were these. Holding leaders accountable for employee outcomes accounted for about a third of how participants scored their leaders on their consistent demonstration of organizational values. So if this is something you're interested in, we have a toolkit on how high performance organizations are doing this correctly. I forgot to tell Zeta I was going to promote that, so hopefully she can find the link and post that as well. More importantly, communicating organizational values to a high extent made the biggest difference in whether participants perceived their leaders to demonstrate organizational values to the highest extent. And maybe this helped them understand what behaviors to look for. Maybe strong communication of organizational values helps them keep those values top of mind and easily identify them. But this is probably one of the easiest lifts to improve your culture if your organization already has clearly defined values and behaviors ready. So with that said, I have these are the 6, by the way, traits of a healthy culture. I'm going to talk about how we came to these, but in the next couple of slides, we're going to do an exercise, so to speak. We're going to talk about a few of these and identify certain behaviors that would be affiliated with these values that would enable a change-ready organization, particularly when it comes to adapting technology. So those stories about leaders walking the walk are important to remember and model as well, but also underscores those values how important those values are in defining desired behaviors. We asked participants to self-assess their culture and how it's changed over the past year, using that scale of very healthy to very toxic. But we also asked participants to describe their culture, and we gave them 26 positive and negative traits from which to choose, including an other open response option. And they had to select the top 5 that best describe their culture. And it turns out fit cultures use similar language when describing their culture. These are the 6 that rose to the top. So if any of these are top of mind when your employees are talking about your organization, it's a good indication you've got a healthy culture. So if you're seeing these in employee listening strategies, that's an excellent sign of healthy pockets within your organization or healthy organization overall. And so we know leaders modeling the way has a big sway on culture, and leaders modeling the way when organizational values are aligned to desired behaviors, those need to be clearly articulated. And so this activity, which we're going to do next, is really about defining the behaviors that support a change-ready culture or a change-embracing culture. An example, no AI or no technology, for that matter, is ethically responsible. It takes a culture, the culture within which that technology is embedded, to create an ethically responsible technical organization. It can't be mandated by the board or the CEO. It is incumbent on each employee to apply the right technology to the right process with the right information to occur. And what if these 6 made up your organization's values? I'm just asking you to hypothesize. If these are your organizational values, what types of behaviors can we ascribe to one of these that would enable a responsible digital culture or a culture that embraces technology? And this is an exercise, again, where we're focusing on a change-ready culture as it relates to technology, but you could do this exercise with any outcome in mind. If you wanted to create an inclusive culture, you could take these values and then define behaviors that enabled an inclusive culture. And you'll see what I mean by that. So employee focused, that was the first one you saw there. What are some behaviors that could define, what are some behaviors that we could define if this was our organizational value that underscores an organization ready to embrace technological change? And as an example, just to get the juices flowing, here is one behavior we could talk about: ensuring employees are given the necessary tools and resources to adapt to new technologies. So again, I'm asking in the chat, if this were your organizational value, what's a behavior that you would articulate, that you could say is an aspirational, desired behavior that would underscore an organization ready to embrace technological change that has to do with employee focus? This is the synthesization. I can't talk today. Activity. So making it about the employee, an employee-focused organization would do what in order to embrace technological change? What is a behavior or an action? And so as you're thinking about that and hopefully writing something in the chat, don't worry, I have other examples of how one might do this with employee focus. So another option would be a behavior that you could say is develop and train workers to effectively leverage generative AI. Oh, I see some coming in. Delivering on learning for new technologies related to job responsibilities. Absolutely, Robert, that's a great idea. L&D activities that are available online and ready. Yep. That really makes it accessible to all the employees, makes it about the employees. Start with the why behind the need for this technology. I love that, Diane. I've heard a lot lately, actually, from organizations that are talking about performance management and development, and they're saying we need to do more to make sure that the employee knows that the onus is also on them to create their development plan, to create their future career. It can't just be the organization and the leader, a top-down effort to develop the employee. It takes 2 to tango, right? And so starting with that why and that communication, I think, is really a great idea and super important right now.
Yeah, I love some of if you combine some of these, like many are mentioning the need for training, but the best training includes the why up front in the training. People learn better if they understand the why, the WIFM, the what's in it for me. So absolutely, I'm loving these responses that are coming in.
I love it. The dedicated day to learning. That's fantastic. Making the technologies available through self-service or a work leader user group. Yep, that does too. And I liked Robert's other idea about creating excitement as well. Ooh, Cordell. This is fantastic. Generative AI, okay. Develop job descriptions and tell those involved in making job descriptions how things will change, show them how it will look, what it will look like, and then practice how making job descriptions with generative AI actually gets done. That is a great way to put this all together. I really appreciate that. So as those roll in, I'm just going to give you a couple more of my examples on this one in particular. And you guys will get the deck as well from this. It will be available, I believe. So you can pour over more of these in your spare time if you'd like, if employee focus is a value of your organization. We're going to try that behaviors exercise with just a few more of those 6 healthy traits of healthy cultures. Inclusive was the next one. And the example I have here is encouraging crowdsourcing and multi-method approaches to brainstorming use cases. So bringing, allowing everybody to have input on where the organization tests new technology or what processes they might automate. And also, doing that through multi-methods, because not everybody participates in an ERG. Not everybody answers surveys or participates in focus groups. And so you really have to take a multi-communication method for this type of listening activity.
So again, if inclusive is one of your dominant cultural traits or one that you're trying to promote, share in the chat. Again, if you were looking to focus on technology in the organization, how would you be emphasizing inclusivity more greatly? Going back to the issue of training, you mentioned multi-method here. Same thing would apply with training. Good inclusive training involves multiple learning modalities. There's sort of a myth in the L&D world around learning styles, but it is an absolute truth that people have different learning preferences. Different people prefer to learn in different ways, and that can actually engage some people more than others. Whether it's auditory, visual, kinesthetic, and so on. Those are preferences that people have for how they learn, and what you prefer can greatly impact how much you learn, how quickly you learn, and it can greatly influence the accessibility of the training that's been provided as well. So a key marker there of inclusivity.
Yeah. Here's another example to get the juices flowing. Make sure everyone has access to the same training resources. While some people in their jobs might use technology in different ways, making sure that everybody has the ability to upskill, I think promotes inclusivity. So you may not be using it now, but you have access to it if this is something where you want to go and you want to learn more about it, and maybe do more of this in your next role. And these are just a few others.
I like Robert's example, actually giving support and help to others.
Yes.
Safety. Diane, once again, coming through with a good answer, giving people safe opportunities to share their concerns about the new technology, also how to learn. Safety is a big factor in being comfortable in learning.
Mm-hmm. And because there is a lot of fear and concern when change is involved, this cross-functional group suggestion here has come up at several organizations that I think do change management very well, taking people from different levels and functions and demographic groups, and having a working group or a council that talks about the implementation can help you also surface those unexpected, unintended consequences of change that you don't foresee coming. But also just can help cross-pollinate information, share information, and make and assuage fear and concern, right? I think education and awareness helps stem fear and concern. And so having, more voices, not only just providing input on how this gets done, but also taking information back to whatever group they represent can be a big strategy there. Use online whiteboarding space as a tool versus just depending on Zoom, which tends to be very verbal. Very true, Shufang. Give people safe opportunity. Yes, we already talked about that in Cordell. That's awesome. All right. So moving on to the next example, quality centered. So that was a trait that also, again, was one of the 6 common traits of the healthiest organizations. And my example here for quality centers: make increased quality and reduced human error a KPI or outcome of AI use cases. So as organizations are putting together, say, an AI strategy or AI framework, for instance, making sure that the outcomes they're going to test for and evaluate include increased quality of whatever it is, the process, the product, the service, and reduced human error, which enables quality as well. Those are 2 outcomes that we're seeing a lot of high performance organizations seeing already within their implementation of generative AI. So that would be an example of a behavior that could be identified with a value of quality centered. And this is just data from that AI HR study that I referenced that's coming out in September. We asked, what kinds of outcomes is your organization experiencing from experimentation or use of generative AI in HR? So this is also just a category of the participants that were already experimenting or using generative AI in HR. We ask them what outcomes they're seeing already at this point. And you can see it's too soon to tell there at the bottom. This is broken out also in our characteristic way of high performance organizations versus low performance organizations. And you can see low performance organizations are far more likely to say it's too soon to tell. The top outcomes organizations we're seeing were time savings and increased productivity. And you can see there is some differential between high pos and low pos. But when you talk about enhanced quality as the outcome that leaders are seeing as a result of their implementation of generative AI in HR, high performance organizations are more than 4 times more likely to be noticing that enhanced quality. And reduced human error, you can see below, is about 2x. So.
Yeah, I love that. I'm seeing enhanced quality with the biggest delta between the high performance organizations and the low sort of stands out to me here. I know, Katheryn, both you and I love, even though it's a little further down on the chart, the ability to divert employees to new projects and tasks. I think that's a real win for using generative AI and for using AI and automation more generally. I also just want to call out the fact that, a lot of the sensational headlines around AI, around ChatGPT or generative AI in particular, talk about, how many people will lose their jobs. And yes, that's one possibility when we're talking about cost savings here. Certainly makes the chart. But with all changes or initiatives to improve things in organizations, typically you're looking at the big 3: time, cost, or quality. And it's rare that you can impact all 3 positively. But many organizations will find with AI, automation, generative AI, and so on, that they will be able to choose to do that and find a balance between maybe some cost savings that may come from having fewer employees in certain areas of the organization. But in many cases, you'll have just as many employees, but you'll be doing things faster, time savings, or you'll be doing things better, enhanced quality, reduced human error, and so on. So it's a real opportunity in organizations to look at that classic trio: time, cost, and quality, and figure out where you want to have the preponderance of your benefits come from here.
That's a really good point, Tom. Thank you for illuminating that. The 3, I love that. Like the 3 horsemen of successful change. One more example. So a learning organization, what are behaviors we could identify that would enable a culture that is change ready, that embraces technological change? And the example I have here is provide ongoing training and development opportunities. We've talked a lot about that, right? It's also worth, Leo has just posted, it's also worth thinking about new roles that will be created and required as well. Very good point, Leo, about generative AI, absolutely. And there's a lot of adjacent skills that could help fit those new roles within the organization. We have to identify those as well. That's another important strategy. But so if you have a learning culture, if you have a learning organization, learning is one of your organizational values, what are the behaviors that you would identify that should be the desired, stated, communicated behaviors in order to enable a technological change-ready culture? Really good point, Stacy. Also, keep going back to generative AI. It is the topic du jour. So she asked about the known challenge with data information generated using generative AI. So those hallucinations or inaccurate data that it can sometimes produce. That a behavior that could be quality centered would be having processes that involve generative AI that require a human interface. So a human gatekeeper, so to speak, with the expertise and knowledge to take whatever that model produces and not only fact check it, but improve it, right? And make it, tailor it to the organization's needs even better. That human expertise is still so critical when it comes to working with AI and generative AI specifically. Just because generative AI is so great at first drafts, and that's really how we should start thinking about it. It's a first draft enabler. That's what it makes, and then the human needs to work with it to improve the output. But other learning examples: reward people for taking initiative for their own learning. That is absolutely a fantastic one. Diane, great job. Drives importance of upskilling and reskilling in an organization as well. Yes, Stacy, so true. Any other behaviors? Show and teach people where to find resources throughout the internet to learn about new tech and other items. Show them the tools. I love that. I think that's a fantastic idea. We need to also, I think, go back to showing people how to go verify sources, right? How to look at where information is coming from when generative AI produces it, and whether those are actually the right sources from which to pull. I often find when I ask generative AI, large language models for the sources that enabled their response, I get articles that not from the best or neutral sources, so let's just say that, or very dated information. So
that can also be one of the
fact check.
forms of hallucination. Oftentimes, ChatGPT in particular will make up references or make up sources for some of the things it's claiming are true. Gotta love Leo's response here. Thanks for that little plug, Leo, saying I4CP's website is a great source for information on these things. And I'd like to call out our colleague, Judy Elbers, and her AI toolkit, which is available to I4CP members. That in particular for HR uses of AI is a great tool for HR people to upskill themselves.
Absolutely. So fantastic ideas here. I know we're getting close to the end of our time. So just to move on from that exercise, this is from the original report where we talked about cultures of learning and healthy cultures. Knowledge sharing is common among those organizations with the healthiest cultures. Senior leaders and frontline leaders are trained on the desired behaviors. Even middle managers should probably be included, because as we saw in that past slide, how important that can make a difference in terms of driving a healthier culture. Internal mobility is formalized, and a talent marketplace is in place. And those were findings from the Culture Fitness report that really helped enable the learning value from what we found in our research. One of the things that I like to talk about, so I do teach still at UNLV. Before I joined I4CP, I was a assistant research professor in the School of Leadership, in the School of Public Policy and Leadership. And we had classes where we talked about organizational change and organization change theory. And we talk about what is a learning organization, and it's really hard to define. But one of the things I love to articulate is like, organizations don't learn. An organization is it's a fiction in our head and a shared idea that we all understand, but it is the humans and the human processes and behaviors, really the culture, that enable an organization to build new knowledge and share and act on knowledge and then evaluate. And this is like a sort of a routine process, but you can have really, key high performing employees. And if they're not sharing their knowledge, or someone isn't enabling them to share their knowledge with others, they leave, and that knowledge, those skills are gone, right? So the learning and the sharing part is really important. And how do we do that? Because people who are really skilled and have lots of knowledge aren't necessarily the best teachers also. So they need learning and development professionals, and really like HR, human capital experts, to help them share information to make the organization a true learning organization. And so for our last poll, real quickly, we wanted to emphasize personal learning, because that is a huge part also of a learning organization and creating agile cultures. And so we wanted to ask, how are you personally using generative AI at work? Are you not? That is an option here. But are you using it for any of these, or for other purposes in your day-to-day activities and doing active, experiential learning?
And this is definitely a select all that apply. I know some folks have started using it, as you said earlier, creating drafts or writing, initial versions of things like job descriptions, interview questions if you're a manager of people or in TA, can be multiple.
Mm-hmm. While we're waiting for those results, we can also just populate this slide here, which I know is an important one.
Yeah, I'll speak to that while we're waiting on these results. All of our Next Practice Weekly sessions now qualify for recertification credits with both HRCI and SHRM. So if you have an accreditation with either of those organizations and are looking for recert credit hours by attending this session, you qualify for 1 hour there. So just jot down the program ID and or activity ID, whichever is relevant for you. And now let's return back to our poll and see the results. And it looks like about half of you on the call who participated in the poll said you're not using it yet, but the other half had a pretty even spread across drafting, whether it's personal emails, policies, job descriptions, interview questions, all getting anywhere from 10 to 35%, it looks like.
Absolutely, and that almost mirrors what we found in our survey of 1,500 participants. But it was, I want to say, 39% of your peers aren't using it for work, and a little bit more were using it for the largest number of responses were using it for researching information, which really speaks to like using ChatGPT, using Bard and Bing as your next version of Google.
One thing I'll note here too, and I know Katheryn, you agree on this, and Judy does as well, and Kevin Oakes and others at I4CP, is if your organization has told you you can't use ChatGPT, or they've locked it down, they haven't brought it behind the firewall yet, which all these organizations will eventually, because it'll be built into Office 365 and the Google Office suite. So eventually everyone will be using these tools. I would encourage you at home to at least experiment with where you can with whether it's Midjourney for image creation, ChatGPT for text Q&A. I've got a trip coming up soon and I'm going to be taking a vacation. I'm going to ask it, create an itinerary for me at my destination. There's simple things you can do like that aren't necessarily work related, but you will be learning some skills on a work related tool, something that will find its way into your office down the road. So I'd encourage you to do that. So for the 50% of you that aren't using it at work, I hope you're at least exploring it in your personal life.
Absolutely. I just recently asked it to create an itinerary for our family's upcoming trip to Voyageurs National Park. And I got honestly, I got great sources, great sites to go visit for the real information. That was the real action. If you want to learn more about building healthy cultures, I4CP has got you handled. Our CEO wrote the book on it, literally. This is Culture Renovation to Build an Unshakable Company. It has 18 sequenced actionable strategies that you can use in your organization that will enable change. But we also have these other resources as well. A culture renovation assessment, culture renovation workshops, case studies, and more.
Great. Well, we're at the top of the hour. I want to thank you, Katheryn. This has been a wonderful walkthrough once again, not only of our healthy cultures research, but weaving in the latest and greatest on generative AI and how that plays into cultures and organizations. So appreciate all that you shared today.
Thanks, everyone.
And thanks everyone for your participation. Great to have you with us. Hope you'll join us again next week for the next round of Next Practices Weekly. Bye-bye now.